Hi, Dave here. I'm back and I wanted to talk about something that was brought up in a conversation with a friend of mine recently, and that's reloading. Have done some reloading. I'm not a professional at it. I am an amateur at reloading. However, I do have some experience. I have reloaded thousands and thousands of rounds. However, like anything, there's always room for improvement, and you always end up learning something along the way. And in this case, there is some lessons to be learned. Now, I'm going to break this up because reloading is a huge subject, and there's so many different ways of doing it. And there's so many different options out there, and so many different pieces to it that I don't feel like it could fit in a single video. So what I want to do today is I kind of want to go over some of the basics, what you need to start, and what I started with, as well as some of the tools that I found are pretty important right off the get-go. So when I started, I decided what rounds I wanted to reload right away. And the first thing I did was I went out and purchased a reloading kit. Now, I had seen this online, and I had seen this around on YouTube, and I saw a bunch of people using it, and I was like, oh, that's pretty cool, and that seems very inexpensive to start to see if I even like it. So I went out and I purchased this Lis reloading system, which is... Lis is probably one of the least expensive systems. There are a bunch of other systems out there. And this one is a manual reloading kit. And here, let me show you under here what it looks like. It comes in this case. There's a piece that, there's a data card that comes with it about it. And basically, it's this setup. Now, I did break the punch here, that punch. And I did have to make another punch. That would be this one. I took a regular punch out of Walmart and I ground it down so it worked the same. But essentially what that is that's a depriming tool. And this one had the same little tip here, but it broke right off. So what this kit does is this allows you to manually reload ammo. Or rounds. What is manually? Well, you literally use a hammer. So this was part of my kit I bought. I bought this separately. And basically what you do is you place your brass in here with the bottom, with the hole down. You put the decapping or deprimering tool down through the center into the hole that the primer shoots through, and you bang the primer out with the hammer. So this is a spent primer, so it will not explode. Then you have an empty case to clean up. So you should clean your primer case. Now, what I had found and what broke this tool was there is usually grime and dirt down in the bottom of it, and you will break these primer tools. Because sometimes like where I would pick up my brass, it was a dirt area. It was out in Arizona. There was sand, there was dirt, and that would get down inside the primer pocket, and that would cause you to have a hard time getting the primers out in some cases. So I did break my primer, my decapper. Oh, interesting. I just realized I broke this as well at one point. It's chipped. So this is made specifically for reloading 9mm. And what you do is you use this to, so essentially your primer sits, you decap it with this. You use this as a force down inside the round or shell inside here to resize on this. You also use this to prime it with this. And then you use This part, adjusting the length here, adjusting the length with this, and notice that is curved. You use this, ooh, there we go. Now it's curved right in here. You use this with this to set your bullet or your bullet into the shell with the powder. Now, it does work. It is effective-ish. Oh, and this is supposed to be the amount of powder you should use. Now, if anybody tells you this is the exact amount of powder you should use when it comes to smokeless powder, question that. I found that that is not always the case. Powder volume to weight is not always the same. And I have proven that on my scale, which is something I found out very quickly you do need. And you can find scales actually pretty inexpensive. I actually went a little bit more expensive and got a good scale. But this and this is what I started with. And I quickly realized that I needed more equipment. I also found that you have to size your shells because they're not always the same length. I was not told this originally. After you fire a round out of any ammo, you have to resize that round. Also, I found very quickly that the primer pocket, even if you clean it and vibrate it and all that stuff, is not going to be clean. So here are two tools that I found very quickly I needed. This is a primer cleaner, or a pocket cleaner. This goes down inside the pocket of the bullet, or of the shell, excuse me. This is for small primers, usually small pistol primers. This is for large pistol primers. This, I believe you could use the larger one for rifles as well. I have never tried it. So that's pretty important. The next thing I found was a lineman. I believe it is a lineman. Yep, it is a lineman case trimmer. And what this does is it gives you a general idea of overall case length, which is actually important. And this is a card I found from Lee, actually, from 9mm, that gives you information about shell length, maximum shell length, maximum overall length, things like that. And I'll go ahead and get a picture of this and post it. So you have to trim your case down because when you fire, the case elongates a bit. And each time it's used, it gets longer. Well, and as a result, also the sides of the case become thinner. So you want to watch how many times you've actually fired this brass as well. When you find brass out on the range, be cautious. Always check it. Always inspect your brass. But this is important. This kit actually came with all the pistol primers, or all the standard pistol lengths. I believe this is 40, 45, 357, 38 special, all that. So, and I believe even 44. So this is the 9mm. You basically slide it inside the shell, and it goes down through the pocket, sits in there, and trims the case shorter. You always want to check your cases to make sure you haven't trimmed them too far. You also want to check your cases to make sure you haven't trimmed them you've trimmed them enough. And for that, I found you need a caliber. So everything in the US is in inches. Now, there are millimeter translations that come with it, but they usually talk about things in inches and in thousandths of an inch. So, and hundred thousandths of an inch. So I got a cheap set of Pittsburgh calibers. You don't need an expensive set as long as they are accurate. These are accurate. I have tested them against expensive ones. And these are locking ones. They're digital. It's probably dead at this point because it hasn't been used in a while. Oh, yeah. Power's gone. There's no power on this. But it came with a spare battery. So I got a caliper as well. So I was able to test the length of my shells, and I was able to test the overall length of the round. Now that's also important for feeding. It also tells you if your bullets, as long as your shell casing is the correct length, you can verify that you have seeded your bullet properly as well. If you seed it too low or too shallow, you can get jams. You can end up causing too much case back pressure. If you push it down too far, you can push out your primer, which can cause your round to go off with some firearms. If the primer is out too far, I mean, there's a large number of things that can happen. You want to be very cautious with that. Now, the next thing that I determined. Now, are you noticing a pattern here? As you work your way through it, you find things that you not only need to become safer, but you also need to make things a bit easier. The next thing I found was this. This is a chamfing tool. This allows you, if you push this down in like this, will take off the burrs on the inside of the shell. And if you push the shell up in this way, it takes the burrs off the outside of the shell once you're done cleaning off or shortening the shell. Now, after I got this one, I was like, well, it works okay, but then I ended up buying a better one. So you find out what tools work for you, you find out what tools you need, and then you find out what you have to make. Another thing I found that I did very inexpensively, before I decapped, remember I was talking about I broke the decapping tool. Well, I decided that cleaning out the inside of the shell before I decapped them was very quick and easy, especially if I'm picking them up and they're shells I don't really know. I pick them up and I can scrub them out with a brush real quick just to make sure there's no debris inside. And then I was able to keep from breaking off tools. And you'll end up finding what you need to make and all that. So, so that's the beginning of it. You end up finding all these different tools that not only make your life easier, but make your job a little faster, make it a little bit safer, things like that. Now, one of the funny things I have to mention about this set is when you're priming your brass with this set. This is the priming tool for it. This is spring loaded right here. See that goes down, that spring loaded. That little hole in the center, that is where the primer sits face up. So the explosive in the primer faces up with the anvil on top of it. You place your shell on top of this washer looking thing, and then you place this on top of it. I'm sorry. Nope. This on top of it, just like that, to hold it in place. This goes on top, inside here through the center of the shell, and then you whack this part with a hammer pretty hard. Now, if this is off in any way at all, if this shell is off in any way at all, and this should hold it in place. Doesn't always. If the primer is off any way at all, you have now set off that primer. If you're going to go this route with this set, I would suggest wearing hearing protection while you're doing it. Simple reason, I have wrung my ears multiple times doing this. Now, I quickly learned that is not the safest way of doing this, and I spent the money to get a primer. a primer set. I cannot remember what it's called. It's an auto primer. There you go. And then there's other pieces that go with that, and I'll get into that. So starting off, what do you need? Could you reload with this? Yes, you could start off with a manual reloading kit, and they do sell these in multiple calibers. They've got this is the 9mm. This is what I decided to start with. There are other types. There are 40. I've seen 40. I've seen 45. I've seen 357 Magnum and 38. That's a combination one usually. I don't believe I've seen 25. I've seen somebody doing 25 auto, which would be incredibly tiny. And I believe they make them in 380 as well. So I know they're out there, or at least they were back then. I know that they're effective. They work. They are kind of, in my opinion, dangerous to do. Now, I'm not going to be reloading because I don't have a space for it right now. I'm not going to be showing how I physically do it because of that. It's not safe to do it indoors. I've seen people doing it in their living rooms. In my opinion, you're dealing with explosives, and that's not safe. You're dealing with primers, which does have an explosive in it. You're dealing with smokeless powders that if they catch, they're going like that, and they're taking other stuff with them. You're dealing with projectiles. It is very dangerous. You don't want to do it around kids. I have kids that live in the apartment with me. I won't be reloading on video. The other reason is YouTube does not like it. It is against their rules, so I will not be doing it. However, in the next video, I will be showing some of the other stuff. A couple things I want to show other than the things that I started with. The one thing that surprised me, if you're wanting to do this inexpensive, is how hard it is to actually collect enough brass to make it worth it. Now, over the years of shooting my own and collecting, this is just one of 3 bags I have down here. I have a ton of brass right now. If I wanted to reload, I have plenty to start with. All of this would have to be processed. It would all have to be lengthened. It would all have to be cleaned. It would all have to be prepped. And then I could start primering it. And then you have to drop powder. And then you have to do, we'll get into all that. But getting all of the brass you need to make this worth it is difficult. You can purchase it, and it does get expensive. My suggestion is, if you're thinking about getting into reloading, first thing you should do is collect brass. Start collecting brass. If you go shooting and you fire any kind of standard ammo from factory, collect your brass afterwards, bring it home with you. Just store it in containers. Get yourself some cheap throwaway containers, throw them in there, get some freezer bags like this, throw it in there, put it aside so you have some brass to work with. Once you've gathered enough brass to start with, start cleaning. There's videos on how to clean your brass without a tumbler, and we'll get into what kind of tumblers, but there's videos out there on how to clean your brass using vinegar, water, salt, and dish soap combination. It is effective. There are some cautions you have to take with that, which I've learned, and I'll get into that as well. But start processing that, clean it, get the primers out of it. If you have get an old punch tool to get your primers out. If you haven't got a reloading kit, get some punches from like Walmart, some cheap ones. Make sure it'll fit inside the brass, and then trim it down and grind it down to a small point there. See how that looks. And if you have an old dead blow hammer, an old hammer of any kind, and then put it over a hole and pop out your primers. Make sure you get them all out. I would suggest, if you're doing brass, you pop the primers out before you clean them. I've seen people do it the other way, and then they go in and manually clean out every primer hole. I do suggest you go and clean out your primer holes. That gives you the chance to inspect to make sure your brass is not a non-reloadable one. Caution, if you have one of these and you go to some brass or steel cases have a different kind of primer pocket that the anvil is built in. If you try to press it out, you could break this. Uh, my suggestion is be very cautious when you're doing this stuff. Inspect your brass before you start cleaning it. Punch out your primers and then clean your brass. Get enough set aside to where if you do decide that this tedious thing is something you want to try, then you have enough to start with. And I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to leave this off here. Let me know if you guys reload. Let me know what your experience with reloading has been. For me, I found it to be very therapeutic. I would do it in stages. I would clean my brass. I would process out all the pieces of brass, inspect them. Then I would take that set of brass and I would clean them. Originally, I started off with the liquid method I mentioned, but tumblers also, I got into a tumbler at one point. And then see if you like it. See if you enjoy this stuff. Go through that and see if it's something you're into. If you are, then I suggest moving on to the next. Get something inexpensive and see how much you like it. Work your way into it. Some of the tools that you start off with will carry over, and we'll get into some of the more advanced tools in the next video. But this is where I think I'm going to leave it off because this is actually getting pretty long. There's a whole lot to this whole process, but start off slow, see if you like it. Leave me a comment on your suggestions on what to start off with. And I'm not talking full balls to the wall. Oh, you need the multi-automatic press that runs through and presses everything. I'm talking starters, people that are just starting off. Go ahead and leave me a comment, like, share, subscribe. Share this out with your friends that are considering reloading, and we'll go ahead and go through this series. I think I'm going to create a series on this. And check out my wife and mine Twitch channel at Jen and Dave, and we stream every Friday night at 5 p.m. We do retro NES games, and this is Dave, and we'll see you next time.